What if I told you that the technological blueprint for your entire modern digital life, the computer mouse you click, the graphical windows you minimize, the Ethernet cable connecting your office, and the laser printers spitting out documents, was not invented in Cupertino or Redmond or anywhere near Silicon Valley's famous early garages?
It was invented by Xerox.
The photocopy company.
Exactly.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is, well, it's critically strategic, and it's designed specifically for you, the future leaders in information systems and business, the ones who are right now tackling the biggest questions in innovation strategy.
We are opening Chapter 4 of the strategy textbook, Dealers of Lightning, to dissect one of the most brilliant and, frankly, heartbreaking corporate case studies in history.
We're talking about the spectacular rise and the catastrophic commercial stumble of Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center.
I mean, how exactly do you invent nearly every pillar of the digital age, hold the future right there in your hands, and yet somehow fumble it away?
That is the core question. It's the question for every modern business student navigating AI, quantum computing, blockchain, you name it, today.
It really is. The lessons contained in the PRC story are not just history. They are a crucial roadmap for positioning yourself for success in technology management.
Because knowing how to generate revolutionary ideas is vital. We all know that. But knowing how not to lose the massive rewards of that innovation, that is what separates the industry leaders from the historical footnotes.
And we are going to dive deep into the specific structural and cultural mechanisms that cause this failure so you don't repeat them.
Okay, but before we unlock these crucial insider tips on innovation strategy, just take a quick moment. If you find this deep dive valuable, and we guarantee you will, please hit that like button, subscribe, and maybe share it with a classmate who is also prepping for their IS strategy exam or just loves being ahead of the curve.
And always check the description below. We've compiled additional resources, relevant case studies, and some key concepts that really complement today's discussion.
All right. So today we unpack 4 core challenges that every innovator faces. First, we're going to look at the requirements for nurturing institutional breakthroughs.
Then second, we'll examine how to navigate and maybe even survive the whole innovation ecosystem.
Third, we'll analyze the frustrating reality of crossing what's called the diffusion gap.
And finally, we dive into the catastrophic commercialization failures that doomed Xerox's attempt to dominate the digital age they basically created.
Okay, let's unpack this engine of invention and failure.
Let's do it.
So when we talk about generating true paradigm-shifting innovation, we have to start by recognizing something. The resources you need often, way exceed what a tiny startup can muster, right?
Right. And this brings us to the concept of institutional innovation. It's the deliberate, organized fostering of new ideas within large established organizations. Think corporate R&D labs, government agencies, or, established academia.
So this idea, it directly challenges that classic mythology of the single inventor toiling away in a garage. This is different.
It's a whole different ballgame. Institutional innovation is about calculated risk on a massive scale. These institutions provide the huge, sustained funding, the stability, and the deep interdisciplinary knowledge networks that are necessary to tackle these high-risk, long-term
Problems that might take a decade or more to solve.
Exactly. They are essentially designed to invent the future with, and this is key, minimal immediate commercial pressure.
Okay. And to really appreciate what Xerox PARC was trying to do in 1970, we have to look at the historical gold standards for this model.
We do. And the foremost example is Bell Labs. Founded in 1925 as the research arm of AT&T, it was often dubbed a scientific Valhalla, for a very good reason.
A Valhalla where researchers had, it was almost unprecedented freedom. AT&T was operating as a government-sanctioned monopoly in telecommunications, and they understood something fundamental.
They knew that their sustained dominance required scientific breakthroughs, real ones. Their organizational commitment to pure science, not just, incremental product improvement, was stunning.
And that commitment is why we owe Bell Labs the transistor, which is the foundational component of every single digital device you own.
Not just that, the laser, fiber optic, satellite communication, the UniX operating system.
Wow.
That environment. It was characterized by a culture of open inquiry, publication was encouraged, and there was this deep organizational understanding that basic research is necessary for sustained technological advantage. That's what yielded multiple Nobel Prizes, and it underscores the power of institutional commitment when it's truly foundational.
They were playing the long game.
A game only massive institutions can afford.
Okay, so that's one model. Then there's a slightly different, but just as crucial model, ARPA.
The Advanced Research Projects Agency, now DARPA.
Right.
This U.S. government agency focused not on internal corporate R&D, but on funding visionary projects that specifically bridged universities and emerging industries.
And ARPA's culture, especially under visionaries like J.C.R. Licklider, was different. It was built on tolerating high-risk, high-reward ideas and, maybe most importantly, tolerating failure in the pursuit of breakthroughs.
They got it. They understood that if you're not failing sometimes, you just aren't aiming high enough. It was ARPA's funding, for example, that backed Dr. Douglas Engelbart's team at SRI International.
And that funding, that led to the legendary Mother of All Demos in 1968. I mean, this was a moment in history that truly showcased concepts that were decades ahead of their time.
And it wasn't just a prototype. It was a comprehensive system demonstrating the graphical interface, networked collaboration, hypertext linking, and the first practical computer mouse.
All in 1968.
Insane, isn't it? These foundational ideas needed that massive institutional backing of ARPA just to move from an abstract concept to a tangible working prototype.
Which finally brings us to Xerox PARC's origins in 1970. So why did Xerox, the undisputed champion of the mechanical photocopying business, suddenly decide they needed to join this elite club of institutional innovators?
It was pure strategic paranoia driven by foresight.
Really? Paranoia?
Absolutely. Xerox leadership recognized that the world was digitizing. They feared, and correctly, that the increasing efficiency of electronic document creation and storage would eventually reduce the need for paper copies.
Which was the core of their multi-billion-dollar business.
Exactly. So they charged PARC with a mission of invent the office of the future. They understood that to secure their relevance in the coming digital era, they had to be known for more than just toner and paper.
So it was a defensive innovation strategy.
It was, but one executed with immense offensive ambition.
And their operational setup was, well, it was brilliant, but it also immediately set the stage for later failure, didn't it?
It really did. They deliberately established the Palo Alto Research Center far, far away from the buttoned-down conservative East Coast headquarters in Rochester, New York, and Stamford, Connecticut.
And that physical distance was a specific strategic choice, right? It was meant to foster a different culture.
A completely different culture. That distance allowed them to tap directly into Silicon Valley's unique energy, the talent, the freewheeling, countercultural, and highly collaborative spirit of the 1970s Bay Area.
I'm picturing it. Beanbag chairs, open, non-hierarchical structures.
That's exactly it. The PRC environment was deliberately distinct. It had an almost academic dedication to blue sky research.
So they successfully imported the key ingredients of Bell Labs and ARPA.
They did. Generous long-term funding, visionary leadership, specifically Bob Taylor, who came straight from ARPA and knew exactly how to recruit top talent, an interdisciplinary roster of electrical engineers, cognitive psychologists, and software experts, and minimal immediate pressure for commercial returns.
Their mandate was pure exploration.
Right. Ideas with a 5 to 10-year payoff horizon.
So this setup, it delivers a critical strategic lesson. Breakthroughs require immense patience and a supportive organizational sandbox where ideas can germinate without being immediately crushed by short-term pressures.
Like quarterly earnings or, existing product managers who are worried about their products becoming redundant. Xerox's management deserves a lot of credit for funding this experiment so generously for years.
Okay, but let's go back to that physical distance you mentioned. What are the inherent tactical risks of setting up an independent research lab so far from the core business operations and leadership?
Well, for the researchers, it's paradise. No bureaucracy.
Right.
But for the mother company trying to absorb this brilliance, that's another story. The advantage, as we said, is that sandbox freedom. The distance encourages radical thinking. It attracts top talent who specifically would not work in a rigid corporate bureaucracy.
And the culture can develop quickly and independently, protected from the rigidities of the core business.
They can iterate and innovate at the speed of the valley.
But that protection, that becomes the primary structural liability down the road.
That's the core foreshadowing of the entire PRR story. The challenge is the difficulty of integration later on. They created this amazing island of innovation.
But they never built the ferry to the mainland business.
Exactly. I mean, how do you take these revolutionary, technically gold-plated prototypes built by idealists who prioritize perfection over affordability and integrate them back into an organization that operates completely differently, sells different products, manages different supply chains, and, crucially, speaks a completely different commercial language.
That bridge between the R&D culture and the market execution culture.
It is notoriously difficult to build, and Xerox, despite all its genius, just never managed to construct it.
Okay, so let's move into the mid-1970s. Peace wasn't just a research center at this point.
Oh no. It was the center of the computer revolution. The concentration of talent was just staggering. It's been estimated, maybe with a little hyperbole, that at any given time, almost half of the world's top 100 computer scientists were working, consulting, or regularly collaborating at PS during this era.
Wow, so the sheer output was just unprecedented.
And this is where it gets truly fascinating. When we talk about PARC inventing the future, we mean they were defining the technological architecture of the 21st century. They weren't just making incremental changes to copiers.
So let's catalog this. Let's list the sheer volume of invention that poured out of PARC in just a handful of years. First, the Xerox Alto.
The first modern personal computer workstation.
Right.
It was designed for one person. It had a bitmapped screen, meaning it displayed graphics, not just text characters.
And it featured the graphical user interface, the GUI, overlapping windows, icons, menus, all controlled by the computer mouse.
This was just radical. Their contemporaries, IBM, DEC, they were still focused on mainframes accessed by command line text terminals. The Alto shifted the power from the centralized IT department to the individual user.
The PRX researchers also gave us WISOIG editors.
What you see is what you get.
Yeah.
Which ensured the document formatting on screen actually matched the printout. Seems obvious now, but it was revolutionary then.
And the underlying technology was just as transformative. They developed Smalltalk, a revolutionary object-oriented programming language. For the business student listening, why was this so important?
Smalltalk was foundational because it changed how we build complex software. Instead of writing these massive monolithic blocks of code, Smalltalk treated everything as a self-contained object.
Like Lego bricks.
Exactly like Lego bricks. If you needed to change one function, you changed that object, not the whole system. This modularity made complex systems manageable, adaptable, and extensible. It was the conceptual blueprint for virtually all modern software development, decades ahead of C++ or Java.
Then there's networking. Ethernet.
Developed by Robert Metcalfe in 1973, it was the fundamental local area network, or LAN, technology.
And Ethernet solved the problem of connecting all those individual Alto machines together to share resources.
Especially their crown jewel, the laser printer. This was the foundation for making office computing collaborative, which is now ubiquitous. It was the missing link for the individual PC to become a truly powerful collective tool.
And finally, the laser printer itself. It wasn't just a faster copier, coupled with the invention of PostScript,
which was developed by future Adobe founders John Warnock and Xerox while they were still at PARC.
It launched the desktop publishing revolution.
Right. PostScript was a page description language. It allowed software applications to accurately describe complex layouts, fonts, and graphics to the printer. Before PostScript, printing complex documents was a nightmare of specific drivers.
So PostScript made the graphical interface meaningful.
Totally, because now you could actually print what you saw on the screen reliably in high resolution. This synergy, the GUI, the mouse, Ethernet, and PostScript, it defined a completely new way of working.
Now, you have to contrast this against the prevailing corporate mindset. In the early 1970s, the IBM model was still king. Centralized computing.
And PARC's vision was radical. It was a personal, networked graphical computer tucked under a desk. It was an individual, empowering vision that completely shattered the centralized model of computing.
But these breakthroughs didn't happen in a vacuum, did they? Which brings us to a crucial strategic concept, defining the innovation ecosystem.
Innovation never happens in isolation. An innovation ecosystem is the dense, interconnected web of people, organizations, resources, and cultural factors that support, validate, and accelerate new ideas in a region.
In Silicon Valley, where PR was strategically situated, was the quintessential ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely. You had powerhouse research universities like Stanford, the large foundational corporations like HP and Intel, a constant influx of venture capital, the presence of government funding via ARPA connections, and a culturally freewheeling, highly mobile workforce.
So all these elements created a strong social fabric of mutual interest.
Where knowledge flowed freely and rapidly, PRC acted both as a knowledge sponge and a radiator. They drew heavily from this ecosystem, hiring Bob Taylor from ARPA, pulling engineers from universities.
And when funding for cutting-edge projects dried up elsewhere, Xerox seized the moment to hire that talent.
That's a perfect example of knowledge transfer primarily through the movement of high-skilled people.
However, this openness, this ecosystem of shared talent and ideas, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is. It meant that if Xerox didn't commercialize their ideas quickly, the ecosystem was perfectly positioned to capture that value elsewhere.
Okay, let's talk about the one major PR success story that actually did pay off massive dividends for Xerox.
The laser printer.
The laser printer.
It was invented by Gary Starkweather around 1971. And this project is a fascinating little anecdote, because even this, their most successful internal innovation, faced resistance.
From inside Xerox.
Yes. Starkweather originally tried to develop the technology back at Xerox's headquarters in Rochester, but management actively resisted. They argued they already had copiers and didn't need this complicated new digital printing device.
But what did he do?
He had to physically move himself to PARC, where the culture was more tolerant of radical ideas, just to keep the project alive. That distance and freedom saved the laser printer.
So because it represented a clear, high-margin digital extension of Xerox's existing core business printing documents management, finally recognized the opportunity.
Exactly. They commercialized it as the Xerox 9700 laser printer by 1977. And this machine was wildly successful. It generated over $1 billion annually, essentially launching the entire digital printing industry and vindicating the strategic decision to fund PARCs, at least partially.
So the laser printer is the exception that proves the rule. It worked because there was a clear path to market and a logical alignment with Xerox's core paper and document business.
It was a sustaining innovation. It helped their existing customer base transition to a new technology.
Which brings us to the tragedy.
Right. Apart from the laser printer, every other breakthrough, the GUI, the mouse, Ethernet, Smalltalk, PostScript, were commercialized elsewhere. The open, fertile ecosystem ensured that if Xerox failed to execute, the ideas wouldn't be lost to humanity, but they would certainly be lost to Xerox's bottom line.
It's often said that invention is a burst of genius, but innovation is a long, disciplined slog.
That's a great way to put it. It is one thing to demonstrate a revolutionary technology. It is entirely another for that technology to gain widespread mass adoption.
And this often shockingly large time lag between invention and mass usage is called the innovation diffusion gap, or IDG.
And when we talk about this gap, we aren't talking about a few quarters. The Alto's graphical interface was fully working by 1975, but it didn't reach the mainstream desktop until the Apple Macintosh in 1984.
And then it didn't truly dominate until Windows 3.1 in the early 1990s.
That's a 9 to 15-year gap for a world-changing idea.
The historical examples really drive home the inertia of change. I mean, get this. It took 264 years for the cure for scurvy, a simple matter of eating citrus, to reach routine use in maritime shipping.
Wow. Despite overwhelming evidence of its effectiveness.
And steam power took 150 years to diffuse broadly across industry.
Yeah.
Even the laser, invented around 1960, took about 20 years to find its widespread commercial footing in scanners, medical devices, and, of course, printers.
It's amazing how slow adoption can be, even for something that seems obviously superior in hindsight. For you, the future IS leader, understanding why this gap exists is crucial for setting realistic investment timelines and strategic rollout plans.
So we've distilled 4 key practical reasons for the IDG, lessons learned directly from the PARC experience. Reason 1, immaturity of the innovation.
Right. Early prototypes, especially those built in an experimental lab like PARC, are often expensive, complex, and clunky. They prioritize technical possibility over market practicality.
Look at the Alto. In 1973, it cost an estimated $32,000 per unit.
Which, adjusting for inflation, is well over $140,000 today. Only institutions like PARC or the U.S. government could afford a few dozen of these.
And the technology was physically fragile. The first computer mouse prototype cost $300 to manufacture and was prone to failure.
It's like Malcolm Gladwell pointed out, PRC built things for their fellow geniuses, expert users in a well-funded, climate-controlled lab.
It took the product-focused teams at Apple to adapt those ideas into something appropriate for a mass audience.
And that adaptation involves simplifying the design, removing unnecessary features, and crucially, driving the cost down. That refinement process inherently contributes to the diffusion delay.
Okay, reason 2, market readiness and user habits.
People in large organizations are creatures of habit and inertia. In the 1970s, corporate America was structured around mainframes, centralized control, and pools of typists. IT managers were conservative. Their careers were built on the reliability of existing systems.
So the idea of a personal computer for every worker, requiring retraining, specialized maintenance, and, a mouse. It was utterly foreign.
It was, and it was often viewed with skepticism or outright hostility by corporate managers. They just did not see the need for the PC when the centralized model seemed reliable and efficient.
This aligns perfectly with Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations model, doesn't it?
Perfectly. PARC's breakthroughs were perfect for innovators and early adopters, but the vast conservative early majority audience had not yet developed the psychological, cultural, or budgetary need for individual computing.
And that represents the significant chasm that innovations must cross to reach true commercial success.
Absolutely.
Okay, reason 3, lack of complementary infrastructure.
A revolutionary technology rarely succeeds in isolation. The graphical Alto was only truly useful if it was networked via Ethernet, used a high-quality laser printer, had widely accepted file formats, and most importantly, had killer applications.
Word processors, spreadsheets,
Yeah.
things that demanded a GUI.
Right. Xerox had all the pieces internally at PARC, but the outside world didn't. Ethernet was proprietary at first and couldn't become ubiquitous until industry-wide coordination, led later by Metcalfe's 3Com, finalized standards, and cheaper hardware emerged.
So diffusion is a systemic process.
It is. It accelerates only when the entire supporting technological ecosystem is in place, and that just takes time.
And finally, reason 4, economic and social factors.
Cost is the ultimate gatekeeper. As we noted, the Alto was just too expensive. The technology only became viable when microprocessors, memory, and storage followed the cost curve down, making the graphical interface affordable for mass consumption.
Socially, the technology must be perceived as having high relative advantage and ease of use.
And PARC's initial attempts were neither cheap nor simple to install and maintain outside the lab. It was Apple, with its focus on simplicity, marketing, and a $2,500 price point for the Mac in 1984, that ultimately succeeded in making the GUI both desirable and accessible enough to bridge that diffusion gap.
So the strategic lesson here is paramount. Being too early like Xerox was with the Alto, before the infrastructure, cost curve, and customer habits are aligned, can be just as strategically devastating as being too late.
You risk sinking vast resources into a brilliant idea that the market simply isn't ready to pay for or even understand. You need to plan for that long journey across the chasm.
And you need a chasm-crossing agent.
Which, in the case of the GUI, was Apple. They didn't invent the technology, but they were superior at the necessary strategic work. Simplification, commercialization, and mass marketing to the audience, Xerox was structurally incapable of reaching.
This is the critical juncture of the story. If the last section was the invention of Lightning, this section is the analysis of why the Lightning was never bottled and sold.
This is where we dive into the specific structural, cultural, and strategic flaws that led to Xerox failing to capitalize on its genius. This is the textbook case of the innovator's dilemma.
We can break Xerox's commercialization failures down into 5 distinct yet deeply interconnected areas, right?
We can, and understanding the mechanics of these traps is essential for any leader today.
So failure number 1, corporate identity and focus, or as the book calls it, core rigidity. This feels foundational. What did Xerox truly believe it was?
Xerox had these deeply ingrained mental models. They defined themselves as the copier company, focused on high-margin document duplication and management for large corporate accounts.
And that identity frame was disastrous when confronted with fundamentally new ideas.
It was. When PARC presented a graphical personal computer, executives asked, and not unreasonably from their perspective, how does this help us sell more copiers and toner?
The problem was the metrics. Xerox's profitability rested on long-term leasing contracts for massive machines and the continuous high-margin sales of consumables like toner.
And the personal computing market was nascent, it was uncertain, and crucially, it was characterized by low margins and outright sales of relatively inexpensive hardware, a complete mismatch for Xerox's business model.
So because the new market looked small and uncertain, promising returns in the future that were nowhere near the immediate profitability of a copier lease, top management just largely ignored it.
They fell victim to core rigidity. They were focusing solely on sustaining their current, highly profitable business at the expense of embracing a fundamentally disruptive new market. They were optimizing yesterday, not investing in tomorrow.
I have to ask, if they knew this was a potential future, why didn't they just carve out a small internal venture fund or unit whose sole mandate was to prove the PC business model could work, even at low margins?
Well, that's the core tragedy of Christensen's dilemma. To do that would have required acknowledging that the highly profitable core business might eventually become obsolete.
And that's a hard pill to swallow.
It takes an incredible amount of organizational maturity, and often a leader who is unconcerned with short-term stock price, to invest heavily in an innovation that promises to cannibalize your most lucrative products. Xerox simply lacked the necessary structural separation and courage.
Okay, so that's failure one. Failure two, lack of technology transfer mechanisms.
Brilliance on an island does not equal profit on the mainland. The systems required to move the idea from the lab bench to the production line simply didn't exist.
PR was an island of innovation, physically, culturally, and structurally, separated from the product divisions back east.
And the researchers genuinely joked that their ideas fell into a black hole when handed off. Product managers who were rewarded for incremental improvements on copiers had no incentive, no budget, and frankly, no understanding of how to champion a complex, risky, new computer product based on object-oriented programming.
The organizational silos were just too deep.
Way too deep. They lacked translators, the middle managers or entrepreneurs who understood both the technical brilliance of the alto and the market reality of the customer. These champions are necessary to shepherd the innovation through the corporate immune system, which is designed to reject ideas that look foreign or risky.
And the lack of formal, mandatory review stages for PIARS innovations meant that unless a champion fought tooth and nail like Starkweather did for the laser printer, the idea would just die on the vine.
Filed away as too complex or too expensive.
Which leads to failure three, cultural clash. The friction between the two coasts was immense, wasn't it?
It was bordering on open hostility. The hippie hackers at PARC, often dressed in jeans, were idealistic about changing the world through computing. They viewed the East Coast corporate leadership, the toner heads, as bureaucratic, unimaginative, and profit-fixated.
And I'm guessing the toner heads had their own views.
Oh, they did. Conversely, the East Coast management viewed the PARC researchers as impractical, expensive academics who delivered gold-plated prototypes that cost too much and broke too easily. This lack of mutual respect, this chasm of trust-made communication, impossible.
And this cultural gap, it manifested in disastrous product decisions.
Totally. For instance, instead of leveraging PARC's superior Bravo editor, which was the GUI word processor, Xerox management acquired Diablo Systems, a traditional text-based word processor firm.
So they chose what was comfortable and familiar over what was clearly superior technology from their own labs.
That decision perfectly encapsulates cultural rigidity. And the sales force, accustomed to leasing multi-million-dollar copiers via long-term contracts and catering to large IT departments, they simply didn't know how to sell a complex, networked Alto-based system to individual workers.
Their incentives, their training, their entire worldview was completely mismatched to the new product.
Exactly.
Okay, failure four. The innovator's dilemma in practice. The Xerox star. This feels like the culmination of the first three failures.
It is. The Xerox Star Workstation, released in 1981, was their primary attempt to commercialize the PRC technology. It was technically superb, featuring the mouse, GUI, and networking. But it was a commercial flop because of the dilemma.
It was wildly overpriced.
Wildly. A full Star system cost around $100,000 for a single workstation setup, including the server and network peripherals.
So who's their target? Large corporations. And how is it sold? Through the existing Xerox copier sales channels.
And this was a fatal strategic mismatch. They priced and sold a revolutionary individual product as if it were a high-end mainframe. Their existing sales channels couldn't handle the volume, the pricing, or the explanation needed for a PC.
Meanwhile, competitors like Apple and later IBM were building simpler, cheaper products focused on the emerging, decentralized consumer and small business market.
A market Xerox had dismissed as too small to bother with. The irony is so rich. Xerox had built a better product, but because they tried to fit it into their old business model, they priced it out of existence.
They couldn't sacrifice the high margins required to succeed in the nascent PC market, so they failed to capture that market entirely.
Which brings us to failure 5, execution and improvisation in productization.
The PRC researchers were allowed the luxury of perfectionism. Their systems were over-engineered and built without pressure.
Apple, on the other hand, was working under intense competitive pressure and tight budgetary constraints when they were developing the Macintosh. They had to be pragmatic. They had to improvise to make the GUI experience simple, reliable, and crucially, affordable for the average consumer.
And that's the difference between an academic prototype and a market-ready product.
It is. Xerox's Star was late, expensive, and rigid. Apple's Mac was simple, affordable, and adaptable. It required ingenuity to turn the complex, expensive technologies built at PARC into consumer-grade, reliable, and manufacturable components. Xerox failed at that critical, messy step of commercial execution.
The ultimate tragedy, of course, is that the innovation wasn't lost to the world, just to Xerox. The ecosystem ensured PR's ideas found homes elsewhere.
Right. Robert Metcalfe, the inventor of Ethernet, left to found 3Com, which standardized and commercialized the networking technology, making it ubiquitous. John Warnock and Chuck Geschich, frustrated by Xerox's lack of interest in their page description language, left to found Adobe Systems.
And they leveraged PostScript to launch the desktop publishing revolution.
Xerox benefited only indirectly through smart but ultimately small equity stakes in some of these spin-offs, including Apple. They harvested a few seeds, but they forfeited the entire orchard.
And this organizational myopia isn't unique, is it? We see this happen again.
We do. Consider the parallel story of Kodak. In 1975, a Kodak engineer named Stephen Sasson invented the first digital camera prototype, a camera that did not use film.
And management shelved the invention.
They did. They feared it would directly cannibalize their extremely lucrative film, paper, and chemical sales divisions. Their core rigidity, their fear of destroying their cash cow, meant they resisted the disruptive innovation they had pioneered.
And as history shows, competitors without the legacy burden of film Canon, Sony, Nikon, they led the digital imaging revolution.
And Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Both Xerox and Kodak stand as massive, flashing red warnings. Organizational focus, fear of cannibalization, and a lack of strategic courage can turn pioneering innovation into a massive, civilization-shaping missed opportunity. You have to embrace disruption, not resist it.
Okay, so let's tie this epic failure back to your career path. What does this all mean for you as a technology professional or business leader today, navigating the unprecedented disruption of AI, the cloud wars, and global supply chain shifts?
We've distilled 6 critical, actionable takeaways from the Polar Sea and Kodak sagas. These are lessons you can apply immediately to your work and your strategic thinking.
Okay, lesson 1.
Lesson 1, embrace disruption. Don't fear cannibalization. We've established that the fear of threatening current revenue streams is the primary killer of internal innovation. You have to foster a mindset that welcomes disruption as an opportunity, not a threat.
And practically, this means setting up organizational structures that can tolerate cannibalization. You have to separate the disruptive ventures entirely.
Exactly. Think of Google's structure under Alphabet, where the moonshot projects like Google X operate autonomously, protected from the immediate ROI pressures and performance metrics of the core search or advertising business. These ventures must be judged on their long-term potential, not short-term margin erosion.
Lesson 2. Create formal, robust mechanisms for innovation transfer.
Inventing in isolation is a death sentence for commercial success. You need a dedicated, conscious bridge between the R&D lab and the marketplace.
This requires actively deploying cross-functional teams, establishing internal incubators that treat in-house innovations like internal startups, and assigning highly respected, high-level management sponsors.
The goal is to avoid that black hole where ideas go to die. As a leader, you must ensure that someone is held accountable for acting as that translator or champion, shepherding the innovation through the corporate system and developing its market-ready business case.
And if an idea doesn't fit internally, make a conscious strategic decision to spin it out or license it.
Right. Ensure you still capture value.
Okay, lesson 3. Foster a blended culture bridge the chasm.
PRC's exploratory freedom was vital, but it needed to be coupled with the disciplined, market-focused execution of the main company. You need to develop entrepreneurs, individuals who possess both technical creativity and a sharp sense of market and customer focus.
And avoiding the two cultures problem, the toner heads versus the hippie hackers, that requires deliberate organizational design.
It does. Facilitate mandatory job rotations between R&D and business units. Embed strategists in the labs to ensure prototypes are pragmatic, and embed researchers and product development teams to ensure technical fidelity isn't lost. You need a culture where creative experimentation is safe, but quick, iterative, affordable execution is prized equally.
Lesson 4. Align incentives with innovation goals.
Organizations move toward what they are rewarded for. If Xerox's sales force had been incentivized to sell new, risky computer systems rather than just maximizing copier leases, the entire outcome might have been different.
So to successfully execute a disruptive strategy, you have to align reward structures accordingly.
You do. This means designing new compensation models, providing bonuses for the successful launch and adoption of experimental products, and, perhaps most importantly, having leadership signal that long-term thinking and moderate necessary early losses in new areas are intentional and tolerated.
The entire organization has to understand that the future depends on supporting the disruptive baby business, even if it's currently small.
That's it.
Lesson 5. Leverage the ecosystem strategically, or open innovation.
Because knowledge flows so freely in dynamic ecosystems like Silicon Valley, you must decide how to benefit even if the innovation doesn't align with your core model.
This involves being deliberate, using corporate venture arms to invest in external startups that are commercializing your concepts.
Or engaging in strategic partnerships or licensing deals, as Xerox eventually did indirectly. Contributing technology to industry standards, as they eventually did with Ethernet, can also be a viable path to ensure adoption and maintain relevance.
So the key is making a conscious, strategic choice.
Which ideas to hold tight and which to share to catalyze broader market adoption, ensuring you capture some of the resulting value through royalty or equity.
And finally, lesson 6. Develop long-term vision and patience.
Truly paradigm-shifting innovations, like the GUI, do not deliver immediate returns. They take time to cross the diffusion gap. Leaders must fund a balanced portfolio of projects, from immediate incremental improvements to high-risk moonshots, and set appropriate, realistic time horizons for returns.
So Xerox's failing wasn't really in funding the research.
No, it was in their management's lack of patience and their expectation that a revolution should follow traditional quarterly metrics. The lesson is to pair long-term research with an effective commercialization strategy that understands the diffusion gap and is willing to wait, iterate, and adapt until the market catches up.
The goal is to strategically capture the energy of the lightning, not just witness the flash.
We've charted the incredible journey of Xerox PARC, the institutional engine that birthed the digital age, and we've meticulously analyzed the structural, cultural, and strategic missteps that led to the fumbling of the future.
So the key takeaway for you, the future IS and business leader, is pretty simple, isn't it?
It is. Inventiveness is only half the battle. The management, the mindset, and the organizational structure determine the ultimate value captured from that innovation.
That's right. Xerox invented the future, but Apple and Microsoft dominated it because they were strategically better at commercializing, simplifying, and refining those ideas for the mainstream consumer.
And we learned exactly how to avoid making that critical mistake by building the bridge between the R&D island and the mainland business, and by defeating that core rigidity.
Before we sign off, just a final reminder. If you found this detailed analysis helpful in your understanding of innovation strategy, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive.
And remember to check the description below for access to valuable resources and case studies that will enrich your understanding of these critical concepts.
Next time, we move forward in the strategy textbook to Chapter 5, Architecting the Digital Enterprise Platform's APIs and Modular Thinking. We'll explore how modern technology strategy is built piece by piece, focusing on creating adaptable, scalable digital foundations that avoid the rigidities we saw doom Xerox.
And we'll leave you with this reflective question. Considering the pace of change in AI today, how will you ensure that when lightning strikes in your organization, in your startup, your corporate division, or your R&D lab, you are strategically ready to capture and deploy its energy for maximum long-term impact?
That's a wrap on this episode of Emerging Technologies and Innovation Strategy. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, every disruption starts with curiosity. Until next time, stay ahead of the curve.